Hello, welcome everyone. This is Mihai Algiu, a somatic psychotherapist and the founder of Circle of Being Somatic Shadow Work. And this is another episode from a series of videos, podcasts under the title of Psychotherapy and Non-Duality, where I have invited throughout the years various spiritual teachers or therapists, healers, spiritual authors. And the purpose of this discussion is to explore in depth the intersection and the need of combining the so-called psychotherapeutical modalities that have to do with healing ultimately and processing trauma and eliminating or loosening up these kind of psychological deficiencies or psychological patterns. At the same time, in the context of actual development of self-awareness, realization of our true self, realization of the presence of God within and the presence of God without. So this type of discussions that you'll see a playlist here, it's about talking to people who actually have been dedicated most of their life to these two types of work, which are usually, people usually go either into psychotherapy or psychology, or they go into transcendence, meditation, awakening. And I'm very interested to, based on my own understanding and experience, that it's necessary to skillfully find the sweet spot between kind of working our stuff out together with the deeper truth of reality. And actually, this will be the fourth dialogue I had together with my guest that I will introduce in a moment, the fourth dialogue that you'll see here with Spencer Campbell. And if you see this one, I mean, that will be probably several parts, but you can check out the previous dialogues that we've done 4 years ago. On one of them was on exactly this topic, psychotherapy and non-duality, and the Spencer's take on his therapeutical work while incorporating his lifelong search of truth, of God, of love. The second one we done was on principles of Tantra and the male tantric practices and the female tantric practices, but the Tantra we are talking about is not this kind of pleasure-seeking, sexual related, washed down, diluted methodology, but it's a true Tantra as a high, lofty spiritual pathway. And the third part we had 4 years ago was on a very juicy and meaningful topic, the wound of love. So today, after 4 years of getting to know each other and working together and developing both of us, we want to have a fresh start. And so this is Spencer. Welcome.
Hi, Mihai.
Spencer. So Spencer currently is a marriage and family therapist and the founder of a wonderful center in the foothills in Nevada City called Center for Transformational Psychotherapy, where he is actually hiring people, psychotherapists that are aligned with this understanding, not just psychological ego processing or ego improvement or ego editing in a way that is better. So not just that, but combining this healing with awakening. So he's actually managed to bring this, his understanding and approach anchored in a mental health system. And yeah, I've been fortunate to know Spencer as a first supervisor, mentor, friend, and spiritual body on a spiritual path. And I'm very much grateful for our connection and friendship and ongoing collaboration. And also, about Spencer, I want to say that before he became a psychotherapist, he was a lifelong seeker of truth and practitioner dedicated to the spiritual path that, throughout the last 20 years or more, 25 years or more, took him along initially this Buddhist Vipassana, serious meditator path. Then Spencer studied with the well-known Californian non-dual teacher, Zen master Adyashanti. Then Spencer studied with Leonard Jacobson. And for the last 15 years, it seems that Spencer found the right teacher and guide for him in the form of a current spiritual teachers that is not so well known. She keeps it more like it's not trying to proselytize too much or write books and be on YouTube. This wonderful being that I had the fortunate to receive some of the guidance, Satyama Adiota, that was in the tradition of Guru Bhakti Yoga, Tantric Non-Duality. So, yeah, welcome, Spencer. Looking forward to talk.
Good to be here. Yeah.
And when I first, one of my former supervisors recommended me to seek you out and try to work for you, and saying that you guys would be a good fit. And when I went to your office, what I was really struck was on the window, on the door. At that time, you had a different name. Was called Psychotherapy of Awakening. Psychotherapy of Awakening. And when I saw that, I was like, yes, exactly. That's my understanding, that using this Western psychotherapy tools, the very best of what the Western psychology developed, not as an ego pursuit or a ego drive, but to use this psychotherapy to assist in the process of awakening. And so we've been talking a lot last few years, and there's one topic that we can launch this discussion that is a good platform. This idea, always the way we call it, transpersonal psychotherapy. That's what we are interested in, transpersonal psychotherapy. And I wanted to give it to you and ask you, how would you, what do you understand by that? And how did you reach this kind of current way of understanding the psychic and the spirit, and how it informed your work?
I've searched for a better description of what we do, and currently it seems like transpersonal psychotherapy is the best one. Because I guess transpersonal, across the personal, or you could say like through the personal, because it has to include that. But then what we've been exploring in our own practices and with clients is that to discover fundamental happiness, you have to have access to and deepen in your relationship with what's, you could say, beyond or prior to the ego structure. And understanding what the ego is, essentially, and it would probably be good to talk about that. And why healing is limited within its own context, or within the context of the ego, like why that is the case. But I think the process of what we call transpersonal psychotherapy does involve understanding how to access that awareness, and then to see that actually, this is what's fascinating to me, is that everybody has a emotional, psychological relationship to presence, or you could say to the divine or to source. And from a fundamentalist Christian to an atheist. It's all, every single being has some quality of an emotional relationship to reality itself. And so I found it to be incredibly powerful for those who are open to that kind of inquiry and exploration, to look consciously at the nature of that emotional psychological relationship, and then establish a relationship with presence that can heal that and transform that. And that is, in my own life and then working with people, what I've discovered to be necessary for what we could call true happiness.
So let me ask you something here, and also to define terms. Yeah, we mentioned presence, and also we mentioned ego. So I know that most big bulk of psychotherapy is not challenging or questioning the ego. It's more like the ego comes to psychotherapy. And what I mean by ego is that the sense of being an individual, separate self, autonomous, independent, based on identification with the body or with the mind. So this separate imaginary self comes to psychotherapy, suffering. And most psychotherapy is taking that for a fact and tries to help this seeming separate, imaginary, limited entity to feel better. Yeah. And even in this kind of ego psychotherapy, they use last 20 years or so this mindfulness, mindfulness and using awareness, and to further the process of healing, even with teenagers, to use mindfulness for regulating a nervous system, for managing triggers, to find some temporary peace. But the way you are talking, just in one sentence, you kind of equated presence, awareness, reality, God, and source. I mean, you just said it in the first paragraph like that. So can you, because that's different than what people understand by presence or mindfulness. So can you share a little bit how you reach this, or define a little bit this, the one and the same? Mindfulness, I mean, presence, reality, source, the divine.
Yeah.
What's your understanding of the ego? Because I know you have a different spin about it in connection to feelings and resistance.
Yeah, I know, it's interesting. I mean, just my own process, starting with Vipassana meditation. And, when I was starting Vipassana, I was very distraught. Let's just say that. I feel like I had my midlife crisis in my early 20s coming out of college, and was desperate for some solution for happiness or peace, and also always intuiting that there was something possible with regard to that. And then, Vipassana meditation, it's essentially a mindfulness process where you're observing the phenomena of the self, trying to cultivate an attitude of what they call equanimity, which is, balance of mind, acceptance, seeing things. I think equanimity is see things as it is. And I worked really hard at that for 5 years. I mean, intensely. And there was some benefit to it, but there was a fundamental issue with it too, that I didn't understand myself until somebody showed me what it was, which is that I was trying, within the context of my separate self, my ego, I was trying to accept things. And I think we can point to Yoda where he says, there is no trying, there's only doing. And so what became incredibly helpful, and after a while, I would just get intense headaches and fevers. I couldn't do it anymore. It was being taken away from me, you could say, by life. And at that point, which was kind of a crisis for me, or this thing that I was so committed to, I couldn't do it anymore. And around that time, I'd moved out to California. I began graduate school, and that's when I met Adyashanti. And he said, and it was riveting to hear it, I'd never heard it before, but he said, "You are what you're searching for." And so there was a process of exploring more and more deeply what he meant by that. And that was the recognition of awareness itself. And so his teaching, which was incredibly helpful, is that awareness is what's equanimous. Awareness is able to see things as they are. And it relieved me of that intense trying that I had brought to spiritual practice. And so, you know, things then progressed from there, but that was a really important shift.
Mm-hmm.
And
so then the ego trying to be equanimous and not to be attached, and the imaginary self to find some refuge of stability, it's the awareness or presence, which is already our fundamental identity, that is forgotten or confused. That is that is already equanimous.
yeah, you know, and with Satyama, so Satyama, my current spiritual teacher, guru, is, she always says the ego, or the me, she calls it the me, is the avoidance of feeling. And that it will never be other than that. And that was so helpful to be shown that. And so, and to understand why that's the case. So you were talking about how the ego is a strategy of avoiding feeling that we develop necessarily in childhood. We don't have the developmental capacity to allow these feelings that we're faced with.
Mm-hmm.
And so as a motion of loving ourselves, we devise these ways of avoiding feeling. And you can call that activity the ego. It's not actually a thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's actually an activity, like making a fist is an activity.
Mm-hmm.
And so at its very core root, the ego is the avoidance of feeling. And essentially, I'd say universally, it's the avoidance of self-loathing and fear.
Mm-hmm.
So every single being that's living from that context of a separate self is essentially living on top of, or living in avoidance of, those feelings. You know, and it's pretty amazing to see, because there's so many different strategies. You can have a very successful looking ego or a very unsuccessful looking ego, and everything in between. And they're all various versions of this strategy of avoiding feeling. And so it became very clear in my own process, and this is what I bring to my therapy work and also what the center is about, is the necessity of establishing access to the awareness that's prior to the ego and also permeates the ego, and then exploring a bodily emotional relationship or intimacy with that as the means of transformation. Because that, which is our true self, it's not separate from what we are, but that is what's able to allow feeling in a way that the ego cannot. And so I just, I kind of joke with people that if I don't talk about this with them, I consider it malpractice.
Huh.
Because if we're here about happiness, then we have to talk about what real happiness is.
Yeah.
And so it's an essential part of the process of transpersonal psychotherapy.
So this avoidance of feeling, which is an essential part of our conversation and your work, I guess we can break it down, is this kind of fear of feeling this, whether it's conscious or subconscious or inherited, transmitted from our parents. So fear of feeling, fear of being lost in it, fear of being engulfed, subconscious resistance towards feeling that. And all of this is also inherited from our parents, have been living as this afraid to feel and trying to manage the emotional landscape. I try to do this all the time. Even many years in a spiritual path, I was trying as a separate ego, trying to be present, to become imperturbable.
Yeah.
And using these lofty spiritual practices to witness and to separate my sense of identity from the content, which from one angle is true, but it was coming in order to avoid unpleasant states.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
how did you, sorry, I'm bouncing out. How did you gradually or tie it together that this presence is not just me being mindful, but this presence is my fundamental identity, and then this fundamental identity, the I, is not, it's actually not personal, it is source of my thoughts, but it's the source of sources. So how did you get to this, from one angle, Atman and Brahman are one, like presence and God,
Mm-hmm.
so that this presence is not my own personal special presence that I'm working on, but it's, how did this process work for you?
Well, I mean, it's essentially been a humbling process.
Huh.
And, it started with Adyashanti, where I, you know, I was very intensely committed to my studying with him. I went to every satsang, every retreat. It was just the only thing that really mattered at the time. And so through all of that time, I would have these awakening experiences where there'd be a shift in perception where I, realized myself as awareness.
Hmm.
But the humbling part of that is that I essentially made that into another self-concept without being aware of that.
Mm-hmm.
And it was really a strategy egoically to feel better about myself.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I'm this beautiful thing. I'm awareness. And by the way, I know very well the highest philosophy. And so,
Mm-hmm.
I'm really great in that way too. And, so it was actually, unbeknownst to me, functioning as another part of my ego strategy to avoid self-loathing and fear and feel good about myself.
Mm-hmm.
And it was really through a succession of teachers that were available for more and more, I'd say, intimacy or relationship, that certain patterns of avoiding feeling were revealed. But it really culminated when I met Satyama, and she told me I was thinking God, not feeling God.
Mm-hmm.
And I had no idea what she was talking about,
Mm-hmm.
because I really felt that I knew myself as consciousness. And so, the beginning years with her were simply coming into understanding of what she was talking about. And then coming into understanding of what does it mean to feel God or presence or consciousness. And that was such an important experience and growing understanding to have, because it became the answer to what had eluded me about the sameness of consciousness and feeling. And because, if we all just stop and consider, like, what would that mean to feel God? Like, hey, what is God? It's just a word. You could, call it anything. But we're using that word to point to something. And what is it pointing to? And, it can become clear that it's just pointing to the awareness that is, say, beyond or transcends this ego structure or patterning of avoiding feeling. It's this natural expansiveness, peace or stillness that's always here. But to feel that is to feel everything, because that presence is alive as the body. It's alive as emotion. It's not separate from anything. And so then this deepening discovery, thanks to Satyama, she's the only one who really showed me this, and I was willing to confront my bullshit sufficiently to make me want to look at it, is this deepening experience of the sameness of consciousness and feeling, and then the growing inclusion of feeling and emotion in and as God.
Wow.
Yeah.
Let's slow it down here. Yeah. So it's interesting. There's this, creating this triad, or an essential part of the discovery or the application of these teachings is this triad of, you know, presence, so-called God, and feelings. And I remember that I was coming to you after years of fourth way, serious practice, as well as non-duality, the direct path, this Advaita Vedanta. So when I would hear you, and I was a little bit like you, that I had clarity, intellectual, as well as some experiential sense that this aware background is what is always here. Things come and go, and I'm that, and some kind of intuition that that's not limited. And at that time, I had still uninvestigated issues with God. So somehow God was something that didn't feel good, but awareness or consciousness or universal reality, that felt good. And so when I hear you talk about God, and he was like jamming, I mean, I was like, whoa, wait a minute, what do you mean by that? And so there was some kind of rejection of what you were saying. Also, this that God was so associated with these types of religious teachings that it's an out there-ness. So somehow it seems like through the current teacher, guru that you are close to, and this the gap between, you know, God immanent and God transcendent. So God was not just out there. God is this presence, but God is but the way to feel that is to no longer avoid the feeling.
Yeah. I mean, I really feel, Mihai, that, I mean, this is what I've experienced is in working with people, that we don't want to be what we're conditioned or patterned to be. And so we don't want to be the ego. We don't want to be the me. I mean, this is really the basis of ego psychology, which is essentially trying to fix, improve, or purify the me. And so the humbling in the process for me is the growing, allowing, or surrender of the me to be what it's conditioned or patterned to be, with all of its absurdity. You know, I remember like there's this shift when I was my earlier years of Satyama where I just felt like I was watching a parade of my absurdity just marching in front of me. And then conflicted about, oh, I should be doing something about this. I have to fix this. This is not okay. Like, it's actually okay for me to just be with it, feel it, and allow it in and as awareness. And then, you know, staying with that, it quickly becomes, I usually use this metaphor with people where I say like the attention of my ego, this trying, was like, you know, shining a rickety flashlight on things. But what happened from the release of that trying was just a growing rising of the sun over the horizon. And you can just feel the difference of that, you know, trying to see everything with a little flashlight versus the sun radiating on everything in a way that I could never do from the context of my separateness. And so it became so essential to always let go into that. And so then what it came to be clear that what she was pointing to by this, you know, this pointer feeling God was to feel everything as it is, but to feel it in the context of its natural radiance or spaciousness or non-solidity. Yeah, which is actually, and this is what I love about this process, because it's very rational. You know, this is all things that are now confirmed by modern physics. There is no solidity. Everything is essentially vibration. We'd be like, yeah, I get that mentally, but to start feeling that experientially and to feel the inclusion of feeling as it is that can arise from that is such an essential part of this process of happiness. But, you know, it's a real crisis to come out of this attempt to fix the ego. And it's oftentimes very offensive. You know, that idea, no, this is a problem. I have to fix this. And, you know, and so there's usually a process of, I would say, like, you know, discussion an exploration about that.
Yeah, with your metaphor of the parade, like
Yeah.
the parades of these patterns or identities or self-deceit or all kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Would see that, but then this will be another character in the parade that will be overlooked, is the one that will say, hey man, I can't just let this, like, I need to do something about this. But this was part of the parade.
Yeah.
And so, okay, so although we haven't talked about it, now we are talking about experientialist transpersonal psychotherapy, right? What we are talking now is some of the essential tenets and ingredient philosophy of this transpersonal psychotherapy.
Yeah.
And I was studying Kashmir Shaivism, and in Rupert Spira's teaching, they were say straight up that, hey, consciousness is that which is aware of the phenomena. Consciousness is that in which the phenomena arises, and consciousness is that out of which the phenomena is made.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and they would say, hey, initially it's good to see that which is aware is not this feeling. So create a little bit of distance and space, this neti as an initial phase, because otherwise we are in the washing machine. But then there was this direction, like later, as you get more stable as being this perceiver, then to no longer avoid or not be afraid to. So then, yeah, ultimately the worst feeling, that we try to avoid, whatever it is, unworthiness, a fear of disappearance, fear of abandonment, fear of dying. The worst feeling is some kind of cluster of energy, sensation, thoughts that ultimately are made of reality, of consciousness. And that's what you call, or in your teaching, that's basically that's a self-contraction. Basically, God or reality is confused and is in this setting of contracting itself, avoiding itself. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I want to throw it back to you, and yeah, it seems like what these are core principles: avoiding of feelings, the way to no longer avoid feeling and face them, but not face them as a like, oh, let's be aware of this thing, and but face them. This quality you talk about, released attention. I would like you to talk about this. Because even in Hakomi, mindfulness psychotherapy, you're like, oh, focusing on this, notice this, study this feeling, this witness in the head. So can we, anything you want to explain?
No, it's really good. I think that distinction is important because in a lot of mindfulness practices, you're putting your attention on objects. You're putting your attention on objects, your mental noting, and then you're practicing, accepting the objects as they are. But what I found to be really helpful is that, to let that parade move freely through, it requires actually the release of attention from its focus on objects. And, you can even talk about it mechanically. Attention being like an aperture of a camera, and that you can learn to let it relax open or fall open, and then it falls into spacious awareness. And that you could say that's equivalent to letting go or to surrender. But what's so important there,
the laser, focus on the beam of laser, but opening the diaphragm, so it's more global, not involved. But then this attention itself is from a child of this spacious awareness / God.
Yeah, so a lot of it is about the transcendence of attention itself. But a really important principle, and again, you can pull this from physics, where we started to see around the beginning of the 20th century that the observer was actually affecting what it observes. And I think the understanding of that in science has become more and more sophisticated, where the nature of the observer is impacting reality in various ways. And so to make it really practical and concrete with regard to feeling or emotion, like you said, the most horrible feeling, it's even there. Presence is there. Yeah. There's a light of awareness that's looking at it. But, with regard to attention, what we tend to do when these painful things arise is contract attention in relationship to them. But what happens when we do that, because the nature of attention affects our experience of reality, is we're actually solidifying what we're observing. And I would say that is suffering. Yeah, we could say that suffering is the creation of solidity by the contraction of attention in resistance to what's arising. And so that same thing, if I'm allowing it with released or spacious attention, is then revealed to be essentially of the quality or nature of spacious awareness, which in fact it is. And then there's profound possibilities of allowing feeling that's not otherwise possible, particularly the core painful feelings that underlie the me. And so that's why for fundamental happiness, that inquiry or exploration is essential. Yeah.
Yes. So yeah, we can't really explore, investigate this feeling unless there is some more clarity around this being the witness of them. But ultimately, for me, to have this, for me, was a big breakthrough and shifted many things to have the actual visceral experience that is really the worst feeling. I don't know, I'm in some state in America here in an airport, and the feeling comes in the night of this alarming aloneness with fear, and alone in the world and fear, and I'm going to die alone. These are thoughts, but
Yeah.
that's something there in. And I remember that I would try to apply this teaching, like to welcome it, which already is advanced, to no longer resist it, to no longer to welcome it and witness it. But then there was some breakthrough a few times to, okay, let's really explore it and let it do what it wants, but not focus it. That's the thing, not to focus on it. And that's true. What you focus on persists, what you resist persists. So to notice it, but without focusing it, and noticing the bigger picture. And then I think first time it happened, or sometime happened, that, oh wow, that somehow something shifted, and now there's no longer such a monstrous enemy, and it kind of changed, and it became almost pleasurable. Then gave me the confidence, like, oh wow, they are right. This is possible. So then it's and actually that's the only way through, rather than avoid, do breath work, do this, even do somatic processing. Yeah. So it seems like you were trying to teach this to me when we met 4 or 5 years ago. And so that's an essential, the verification that actually that is transmuted by releasing attention, but it's more complex than that. It is so simple. Not focusing on it, not resisting it, not avoiding it, letting it do what it wants with some,
And so,
this is so essential.
And this is where I think this brings us to the issue of trying. We've talked about this, the do-it-yourself-ism that even happens within many spiritual processes or ways, techniques. And, my guru's guru, Adidas Samraj, he said, meditation techniques can't touch the great fear. Cannot.
Meditation itself cannot touch the great fear.
Yes. And that really stuck with me. And this is where the practice or truth of devotion becomes important. Because the thing that resolves trying, I'm finding, is the simple love relationship with the divine that is the self. And so, and I this is actually something I find extraordinarily beautiful, is that, and this depends on a like a tacit or tangible feeling of presence or God, you know, so that has to be cultivated first. You know, how you access it by the release of attention, the feeling that occurs when that happens, when you do that, and knowing that as the context of reality, this all pervading awake or conscious space that's the substance of everything, that it has an inherent pleasure that's always already freely available as soon as you open to it. This becomes the basis of a very pure love, and I would say ultimately the truest love. And so then, because for me, I was mired in that paradox of trying and not trying for years, you know, trying to accept these things, trying to not try, you know, like ad infinitum.
Yeah.
And then simply when I would just remember my love for the divine, all those things of practice would just naturally occur. And then that, to me, is what's necessary to resolve the paradox of trying. And that is necessary in the face of these core feelings that the ego is unable to manage, because the ego is the result of the avoidance of them, you know, like stark raving fear, you know. And so then faced with that, if you can remember your love of the divine and open to that, then there can be an outshining, an inclusion and an outshining that trying can achieve, cannot achieve.
So, you know, as I said to you, was committed to awakening and awareness and consciousness, exploration, truth, this or that. But then I realized not long time ago in some deep ayahuasca journey that at the same time there was this simultaneous distrust of the divine.
Yeah.
And it kind of shocked me how
know.
limiting this is. And
Yeah.
then now, and things kind of shifted for me. But then I talked to some of my people I work with, clients or people in the group, and they are very serious. But if I bring God in, the word God, or they are like, they are triggered and they are freaking out. And so there's a big issue with the divine.
Yeah.
And you're talking about the divine, and I know it will land on some weird minefield.
Yeah.
So it seems for you, the softening of this idea of the divine and making it actually not some religious woo-woo, but some experiential, soothing love came via the close interaction with this teacher. I mean, am I like some it rescued the divine?
Yes, very
Made it
much so.
practical.
Yeah, very much so. It was, you know, and this is also the principle of guru yoga that there's very little understanding of in the West.
Yeah, can you explain a little bit about the guru yoga? And I know we are going to do other parts and this, but let's open this a little bit.
More exploration, because, you know, I mean, for me, relationship with a guru is something that I was only able to engage in after years of preparation, because I was very averse to it. I thought it was for weak-minded, dependent personality types, you know, that didn't know the truth, you know. And yeah, I was very condescending to it in a way that's embarrassing to think about now. But, you know, in truth, you can only really make use of the guru if you've done enough preparation so that you know it's your own heart, or that you know you're surrendering into the same one that the true guru has surrendered into. And hopefully the guru is a master who, you know, is living as that, you know, has fundamentally embodied that.
Yeah.
And then it's through relationship with that one that you're dissolving into the same one. And then it becomes a profoundly helpful relationship, because here's a being who's willing to point out your blind spots, point out what you're not feeling. In the context of spiritual community, it's, you're completely seen because you're living in household, and all of your tendencies and unconscious patterns are seen. It's a really wonderful and powerful environment if you want to really understand yourself and go through that ordeal of self-dissolving. But yeah, so it becomes in a certain way a manifestation of this relationship that's happening all the time in relationship to spirit, divine, which when I start to open to it, it becomes a self-dissolving relationship. And there is a paradox because, yeah, I think that the concept of God is a obstacle for a lot of people for a good reason. There's been so many unhelpful ideas that have been propagated through religion fundamentally about what God is. And the most basic one is that God is a separate entity, which is absurd if you just think about it for a second. How could it be an entity? If it's an entity, it's occurring within something that's bigger than it. So that's immediately impossible. And then, something that's separate from you that you're relating to is a kind of parental figure. It becomes much more true and powerful when you are feeling it more and more as your own heart, as your own self. And then the paradox of the conversation, the self-dissolving conversation, is that's interacting with my ego structure, my activity of avoiding feeling. And so even though that can be known as it's me, effectively it's not known because I'm actually avoiding relationship with it. And so one of the things that was so helpful was to see that, this teaching from Satyama, that it's one valve, that if you avoid feeling, you're actually cutting off from source. Mm-hmm. You can't avoid feeling and be open to source at the same time. Mm-hmm. And so that simplicity of the one valve teaching was like, okay, so this process of realization is ultimately the infinite inclusion of feeling allowed by the pleasurable intimacy with the divine presence that's permeating it all.
And it seems like some gradual, or go ahead.
Yeah, no, just one more thing. And so, but but what you're saying, you saw that I don't trust God. I mean, that is the essential mood of the ego. It's something that everybody has to account for. And the thing that was so beautiful about it to me is that how, in psychology, we talk about like object relation strategies or attachment strategies. And the fact that everybody is playing that out with the divine, to me, is like very fascinating and helpful. And that can become conscious. Mm-hmm. And if we talk more about Tantra, that's evident even in the nature of our own breath. That there's an emotional stance that's displayed in the nature of the in-breath. Where I'm not going to let the divine or presence in all the way out of this conditioned belief that if I let love in, I'm going to be hurt. I'm not going to let go into it all the way through the out breath out of this conditioned belief that if I let go, something bad's going to happen. And so all that, when it can become consciously dealt with or explored, becomes really, really conducive to transformation.
Well, yeah, so I feel like we just set up the stage for next discussions.
Yeah.
And hopefully we piqued interest from some of you guys online or people we work with them. And yeah, I definitely want to continue with part 2 on continuing with this, actually what Spencer said. Actually, also especially if we had some unfortunate or painful relationships with parents who were either abusive or neglectful or absent, then this automatically is imprinted in our subconscious / our soul, and it's going to inform how we view the world and how we view God. So it's here I can see like awakening to truth plus some processing of our issues with God. Just like we have mommy issue, daddy issue, we have God issues, so that's we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk more and more about it's very important, this right relation to feeling as a necessary portal towards deeper realization. Then we'll talk about the role of the teacher. And, you know, I myself had some questionable teachers, so I have questions and I have some debate here and dangers and pitfalls. Yet I also verified what you are saying, that a true master that is integrous, is not taking advantage of people, and is a true embodied, cleared all of that thing. That's like an essential sauce, the secret sauce from one angle. Just one conviction, dedication, discipline, knowledge. For most people is not enough. So there needs to be this, I guess what I call transmission, but it was not understood, you know, this active transmission.
Yeah. Wonderful,
So,
Mihai.
yeah. Well, let's do this again.
Yeah.
Thank you for your wisdom and
my pleasure talking to you. Yeah, great. All right. Until next time. Thank you.
Ciao.
See you.